What's up guys, EVGA here, and today we're going to be talking about the issues with the thermal pads not being on the EVGA cards. This is only on the ACX 3.0 coolers, so that's for the wind, classified, super clocked, and even the normal one, anything with the ACX 3.0 cooler. So if you own one today and you've bought that previous to November 1st, chances are you do not have thermal pads. Now I do have a link in the description to go directly to EVGA to type in your serial number and check to make sure that you have it or not. And if you haven't registered your product already, go ahead and do that before you try to do that because, well, it's not going to work. It's not going to even know your card exists until you're registered. So just go up to the support tab on their main site, go to register product, and then type in the serial number, which will be located on both the box that you purchased your card from and on the card itself on the back plate. Once you do that, you can get the thermal pads ordered and you can download the VBIOS update. Now what the VBIOS update does is it ramps up the RPMs up another 400 RPMs to the total fan curve, thus making it a little bit cooler. And then once you get your thermal pads on, it'll make it that much better. Now the VRM's temperatures right now are getting upwards of 105, 110 C, in some cases almost 120, and the threshold is like 125 C. So we're talking really hot temperatures, and this could have been avoided by just simply putting on the pads. But that's not the core issue here. The core issue is that for the people that had their cards burn out, it was mainly because they were defective cards, and because internet being the internet, a defective card plus not having a thermal pad there when they checked, this leads everybody to believe that the thermal pad's the cause of the problem and it's thermal issue. But as it turns out, this really isn't the case. In fact, Steve Burke over at Gamer Nexus and his crew did various tests from optimal conditions all the way up to complete, utter torture tests, unrealistic situations, and somehow did not burn out their 1080. Now this thus proves that the thermals was not causing the cards to blow up. This was actually a defect, and there's no real number on what the defect is, but according to EVGA, it's somewhere in the realm of 200 parts per million. So for every 1 million cards, 200 cards were bad, which is like 0.2%. Well, actually 0.02%. And that was according to Steve when he made his video on the thermal issues, and that video will be linked down below. And also the article for that video is also linked down below. Now in this video, I'm just going to simply show you how to apply the fix. And if you don't want to apply the fix, that's okay. You can do a couple different things. You can either do a cross-ship RMA. This is where you ship your card at the very same time that they ship a new card with the thermal pad fix already applied. Don't listen to anybody I've seen it in comment sections and forums. Don't listen to anybody that says you have to pay for that RMA. You do not have to pay for it. You do have to put your credit card number up on EVGA's website, but you do not have to pay a dime for that RMA. That's just so EVGA can cover themselves so people don't try to, swindle a free card out of them, essentially. So that is completely free, and they even give you the shipping label as well if you're not comfortable with taking apart the card. But if you are, go ahead and order your thermal pads, download your VBIOS update. Now this is an updated version of this. Now previously they were shipping with just the wide pad, which is for the back plate, between the back plate and the PCB right above the VRMs. And then this thin one right here, which goes on the VRMs themselves. In addition, with the new kits, they are sending these out too because Reddit struck once again, and this one guy claimed that this wasn't making complete contact on the video memory chips themselves, which is around the GPU. There's thermal pads there currently, but according to a lot of people, they weren't making direct contact, apparently. So EVGA, they cover their tracks and they send these out as well. These are replacement pads for those, and that is strictly optional. This, they say, is optional, but it should be standard. In fact, it is standard from here on out, from November 1st on. So without further ado, let's get right into the video and I will show you how to do this. I gotta take my card out first. So it'll be a little while for me, but for you guys, it'll be like right now. Okay, so one quick thing I want to mention is if you're applying the thermal pads yourself and for whatever reason something goes wrong, don't worry about it. EVGA does have your back, though I do suggest you have video and or picture evidence of the process going down while you're doing it. In this case, I am video recording it, so I am covered if something happens after I do this mod. So you're going to have your tools. So I have the isopropyl alcohol. This is about 91%, and you want 90% or better because that means it will dissipate a lot quicker. It will dry up faster. I also have coffee filters because you want something that's static free. I also have a pair of scissors, which we might not need, but we may need it if we stretch the thermal pad out too far, because you want it to be even with the card itself. So if there's any overhang, you want to snip that end. I also have my own thermal paste, some EK water block thermal paste, even though there's thermal paste that comes with the kit itself, which is kind of this little plastic bag of sorts with thermal paste in it, but we're not going to use that. At least I'm not. But it's okay to use that bag for it if you're doing it yourself. So naturally, we got to take this apart. Go ahead and take yourself a Phillips head screwdriver. And I noticed that a lot of people will take these 4 screws off first. But in my case, I'm going to take off the back plate first. And these 4 screws are the only thing actually holding the card onto the cooler. I actually did see a video where one guy took off the IO shield itself with this screw. Don't touch that screw. You don't need to touch that screw to get everything apart. So go ahead and start unscrewing these screws. And go ahead and lift the back plate off. You can go ahead and gather up these screws. I'm going to set this aside for now. I have a little bowl for all these so I don't lose them. Now I'm going to go ahead and take off the tensioner screws from the GPU itself. All 4 of these screws are spring loaded. Okay. Now when removing the cooler itself, you need to be very, very gentle. Because right now, as you can see, there's right here, if I can focus in on it, right here and right here, there are 2 fan connectors or 2 wires connecting to the card itself. So you want to be very, very gentle with this part. And basically in a nutshell, EVGA does suggest using a flathead screwdriver. You don't have to use it. You can use your fingernail or you can wiggle it off yourself. Just make sure you're absolutely careful while doing this. There goes one. And there goes the other. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and set this aside for right this second. Now, as you can see, these are not covered. This is where we're going to apply the mod for the thermal pad that's necessary, which is this thin strip right here. And before we do anything else, before we lift up this back plate, we are going to clean it up a little bit. Clean up the thermal paste on the GPU itself. Excellent. Now that we got that out of the way, it is time to remove the base plate. These 3 screws, there should be 3. In fact, in this case, we only have 2. If you have a 1080, it might be 3, but for the 1070, it appears that we only have 2. Oh, here's the 3rd one. So we do have 3. So go ahead and remove these 3 screws in the middle. Well, it appears we do need to remove the IO screw as well, which is back here. But let me be clear, you don't have to remove the whole IO shield. Just this one screw right here. Now we'll release the base plate. Wow, that dropped very quickly. So some of the pads, in fact all the pads, came off with the plate itself. And it appears I do see a little bit of residue on there, but not a lot. Okay. So right now I'm going to go ahead and remove these pads. You just peel them right off. And now it is time to break out these pads. Now, like I said, if you have your own thermal grease, you don't really need this one. But we are going to use these ones right here. Now the small pad will be going for these 2 chips right over here. And the rest will go for the other ones. And we're going to lay it down like so. And you do want a little bit of overhang. And then that's good to go right there. So now we can reapply the base plate. We now have our new pads on the base plate. Memory chips. Yeah, they are clearly touching. Okay, now that we have that accomplished, let's go ahead and put on our first pad. Okay. Now what we're going to do is do the best that we can to make this as flat as possible. And this is cut to length. So you want to kind of lay it across, making sure you have that overhang to it. Just like that. And kind of wipe across. Make sure it's nice and even. And that it's not going past the edge of the card. Okay, now that is in place for the VRAM. Now it's time to apply our thermal paste. Now there's many methodologies when it comes to applying thermal paste. Some people say you can't put too much, or you got to do it this way or that way. It's a matter of preference really when it comes down to it. As long as you're not putting too little, you're going to be okay. So what you're going to do is just apply a good gob. I like to use just a little bit more than what I think I'm going to need. That's a nice little goober. In fact, that looks about the same amount that's actually in the bag itself. So go ahead and put that back on there. And we have a base plate screw. Alright. Now when putting this card back together, we're going to of course need to put our fan headers back in. Our fan headers and our LED lights as we're putting this on. So I'm going to be very careful. It's pretty much the hardest part because this is an easy method of doing this. So get your fan header lined up like this on the end. Same method. Get your fan header lined up and push it in place. Now that both fans are in, what you want to do is kind of slide this into this notch right here. This top notch right up here into the hole. Now everything is in place as it could be. Like I said, you got to make sure that notch is on the top. This notch right here needs to be lined up. Otherwise, you'll have some serious issues. Okay, and you'll know that you're right because everything will be lined up. So we're going to go ahead and put the GPU screws back in. Okay, so we're going to set this aside real quick. And we're going to move back onto the back plate. Now you're going to notice that there's these little notches. This is where the thermal pad has to be. Now you can do this one of two ways. You can either attach it to this itself, the PCB itself first, or you could attach it to the back plate. Either way will be fine. And we do need to take these little nubs off. So you can just tear them straight away off. Just pull on them a little bit. As long as these are detached, the pad will have a nice surface area to go onto. So now we have our final pad here. Now we're just going to basically place it edge to edge. It is cut to size. Covering the E and the V. Both sides are sticky too, so this is why it doesn't matter if it's on the PCB or the backplate itself. That looks like it will suffice. This will cover the VRMs completely as well. And you'll notice that there are thermal pads surrounding the GPU PCB as well, adding additional thermals to that, which is why another reason why these cards run so damn cool. So now it's time to put this back together completely. And you'll be doing this in the exact reverse order. And even though you don't really need to, I still like to pop my screws in a cross pattern function. So I'm going to be doing these corners first and then go inside from there. Well, that was quick and painless. My card's back in my rig and everything's good to go. Now, to say the least, as a new EVGA customer, this is literally my first product, this 1070 for the win. And I gotta say that, well, I was definitely worried when I first heard about the news. But at the same time, I'm glad everything turned out good. Because EVGA, they really stepped up and they apologized. They made statements saying that they messed up. And, you know, that's really all you really look for in a company. Because when it comes down to it, doesn't matter what company you have, mistakes are made sometimes. We are human beings after all. And when it comes to electronics and stuff like that, of that nature, there's going to be defaults or defects and stuff like that. So to say the least, you know, I'm actually really glad the way EVGA handled it. While some companies can be very quiet and try to sweep things under the rug, EVGA was very loud about it and very clear on what they were going to do. They made sure they put the customer first on this, and that is something that I really like about EVGA, and something I will continue to like about them moving forward. Now, one thing I do want to mention before I head out of here, the thermal pads on the memory chips, the VRAM, those were actually touching before I took it off, and not to mention there's only an adhesive side on one side of the thermal pad for both the pads that I took off and for the replacement pads. So when it comes to that Reddit post, I really think you need to take that with a grain of salt, because when I looked at the card from the side on the base plate, I noticed that the thermal pads were indeed touching. And the fact that the residue was not on the chips probably had to do with the fact that the sticky side was facing up onto the base plate as opposed to right down on the chip. So therefore, as a new thermal pad, it probably won't leave that much residue on the chips themselves. Now, thermal pads over time, they will, as they age, they will leave more residue. But as far as brand new pads go, only the adhesive side, the sticky side, will actually leave that kind of residue on it. Now, if you're still on the fence of buying an EVGA card, and you kind of had your heart dead set on a 1080 or 1070 for the win, and you just don't know, and you don't feel comfortable buying one with all this fiasco going on, that's okay. You know, just don't buy it. If you don't feel comfortable with it, just don't pick it up. But for those who are interested still, any card after November 1st, from EVGA at least, and from most main retailers, will have the VBIOS update and the thermal pads applied. Now, the one thing I'm really interested to see is if this card will overclock that much better with the new thermal pads on there. Maybe we can overclock together. Now, if you have any questions, comments, or concerns, go ahead and leave it down in the comment section down below. As always, hope you guys have a badass day today, and I'll see you on the next one.